we would like to take this time to welcome you to John and Alice Butler Hall. Please take a moment to locate the green exit lights near you. Our ushers are here to assist in case of emergency. At this time, please silence any electronic devices. The event will start shortly.
Good evening and welcome. It's wonderful to see so many students, faculty, staff, and community members here tonight. We're grateful for your presence as we come together to reflect, to learn, and to be inspired. I'm Liza Johnson, Director of the Wendt Center for Character Education at the University of Dubuque. The mission of the Wendt Center is to foster a culture of character and servant leadership. Through our programs, we encourage personal growth, service to others, and strengthening our communities. One of the ways we pursue this mission is through the Michael Lester Wendt Character Lectures, where we invite remarkable individuals to share their insights. These lectures and everything we do at the Wendt Center are made possible by the generous endowment from the Wendt family, and we are deeply grateful. Tonight, we are honored to welcome John Turbett, a special agent with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. John's career has been dedicated to seeking truth and justice, working on cases from fraud to homicide. His leadership in law enforcement, training, and his commitment to ethical decision-making make him an inspiring voice on the topic of character. John also serves on leadership team at Veritas Church, which gathers here at UD, where he invests in people, guiding them in faith, character, and purpose. Before I introduce him, let us offer a brief prayer. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this gathering. We ask for wisdom as we listen to John's word and reflect on how to live with integrity in all areas of our lives. May his insights challenge us to think about the values we uphold and the contributions we can make to our communities. We pray for John as he shares his experiences with us tonight. May he feel your presence and guidance. We ask that you continue to strengthen him in his work and leadership, and we offer our gratitude for the opportunity to be here tonight in community. Amen. John's lecture, Character Without Compartments, highlights the importance of consistency in our values and actions, no matter the setting. We're honored to have him here tonight. Please join me in welcoming John Turbett.
Thank you, guys. Wow. Liza, thank you so much. I have now lived in Dubuque for about 24 years. I certainly know about the college. I've spent a lot of time on the campus. I'm a little new to the Wendt Character Initiative, and when I heard about this, it's amazing. You have the students, the scholars, you have these weekly classes, you have the fall and spring lectures. It's truly a great vision for the college, and it's an amazing opportunity, and super thankful to be here and get to speak to everybody else that came out tonight. And I have to admit, when I was asked to do this, I started to look at the really distinguished list of people that have spoken before me. It's amazing if you're not familiar with this whole initiative and what they do. And I'll be honest, I thought, I don't know, is this a good fit? I'm not an author. I'm not a social rights activist. I'm not very well known outside of my friends and family. I'm pretty simple, but I'm going to not apologize for all the things that I'm not, and instead I'm just going to share a little bit of my life with you. It's going to be simple, but I hope it's impactful. I am a husband, a father, I'm a police officer, I'm a volunteer pastor at my church. I'm part of a small business that was formed by police officers to research and train the topic of interview and interrogation, so I get to travel and do that. And that's really kind of the big pieces of my life. And so I'm actually really excited for the Q&A at the end. So I don't know how that usually goes or how well people usually ask questions, but I would tell you as I'm talking for the next 40 or 45 minutes to be thinking about questions along the lines of what I'm talking about. And I'd love to interact with everybody during the Q&A for a few minutes when we're done. So without further ado, I was born and raised in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm a Kennedy Cougar for high school, and then I got really crazy and just went to the other side of town for college. So I went to Coe College, which is about the size of UD, and I really can't say a whole lot about my studies and all that. I'm sure it was a fine academic institution, but I was far more interested in playing tennis and dating the woman that would become my wife. So that's what I remember most about my undergraduate education. I did get my Bachelor of Arts from Coe in political science, and I had aspirations to go on to law school, and I in fact did do that. So I moved just a short distance down 380, if you're familiar, to Iowa City, and I was able to go to the University of Iowa College of Law, which was a pretty rigorous academic program, and I really had to straighten up from my undergraduate days, but I was able to get a law degree, and I passed the bar exam shortly after that. I was able to work in a law firm before, during, and after law school, so I had a little bit of a taste of the life of a lawyer, and then I got my first real job. This is my career, and this is, other than all the work I did as a young man, this is what I've known, and I became a police officer in the year 2000. And I was hired not by the Dubuque Police Department or the Dubuque County Sheriff's Office. I was hired by what's called the Iowa Department of Public Safety. So if you're not familiar, I sure wasn't before I became a police officer. You have city law enforcement, you have county law enforcement. I'm part of what would be considered state law enforcement, and then there's some federal agencies around that. So I work for the state of Iowa. That's where my paycheck comes from. And I work specifically in a division called the Division of Criminal Investigation. A lot of people haven't heard of that. Sometimes it's known as the DCI. And we are a small plainclothes detectives bureau for the state police. And I don't just work in Dubuque. In fact, I almost never work in Dubuque. I cover about a third or a quarter of the state, and we are basically on call 24/7. So other places in the state that don't have a lot of police presence can call. And I'm part of what's called the Major Crimes Unit, so this tends to be fairly significant things. And this would be like, a lot of times it'd be a homicide or a sex abuse or a child abduction, but we really work everything, as Liza said, down to fraud cases, and so we do a little bit of everything. So I travel pretty far to work my job. So I've been doing this, and I'll talk about this quite a bit. This is a big chunk of my life. I'm in my 25th year now as a DCI agent. And then about midway through that career in 2010, a couple friends of mine who were also DCI agents and I formed a business, a small business, and it is called the CTK Group. And this is just a private research and training group. And I can tell you back then, when this was dreamt up in a sports bar some night, that it was going to be literally, let's just change the culture of policing, specifically interview and interrogation, which is how police interact with people, victims, witnesses, and suspects. Could we just change the culture of our state? We were all Iowa guys, and that was the vision. And we had no idea where that would go. We didn't think it would go very far at all, quite honestly. And now in 2025, we now teach 30-some 3-day classes a year. We travel all over the country. We've been to tons of different states, and I now have the honor and the blessing of training thousands of police officers. So think about that as I start to tell my story. That was a lens or an angle I never saw coming. And probably most recently, another part I just want to touch on tonight is I get to help lead and pastor a new church in the Dubuque area. It's called Veritas Church. Veritas is Latin for truth. And interestingly enough, our church and our college ministry, it's not just for our church, it's for the whole city. It's called the Salt Company. Both the church and the Salt Company meet right here on this campus on the other end in Blades Chapel, if you're familiar, so the students would maybe know this place. So Veritas Church, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So on top of policing and then training, then I'm also involved in getting to work with my church. So that would be my bio in a nutshell. And some of you, if you happen to read the promotional materials, that's how we get this guy. And when these materials came out, the people that are closest to me, my family and friends, they kind of giggle a little bit, right? Because they probably don't see me like this. And I look at that and I'm like, that seems strange. But this is kind of the trajectory that landed us at John, the DCI agent. So I'm gonna talk some about that. But I think this talk tonight maybe goes not as well as I would hope it to, for two reasons. And the first will be, and these are both on me, they're not on you. So the first one will be if we make too much of this person. So if I stand up here and sensationalize myself and my accomplishments, we're not going to really get to a good conversation about character. So I'm going to try and make sure that we don't do that. And the next thing that I don't want to do is I also don't want to sensationalize these guys. So as I was getting ready for this over the past month, I put together, this is a collage for me of probably some of the worst criminals that I've dealt with. And as I look at those 9 or 10 individuals, I see 9 or 10 murderers. I remember their names. I remember their victims. I remember the cases very well. These are spread out over the course of my career. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, I bet some people here who love true crime and you like your cop shows, you're like, man, that'd be really cool. Let's talk about the worst of the worst. And we're actually not going to spend a lot of time talking about them. I will show you some things, but I don't want to actually spend too much time on these guys because let's be honest, if you're giving a talk on character, these guys don't have a lot of it, right? So this would not be a good place to go for a talk on character. So we'll move on. So we're not going to sensationalize these guys. We're going to spend our time maybe doing something else. So I want to take you back to when I first became a police officer. And if you're not familiar with how this works, I got hired and I went to the State Police Academy in 2000. It took about 19 weeks. Ours was hosted at Camp Dodge in Johnston, Iowa, so it's on a military base. It is, for those who have been in the military, it is fairly boot campish. And I was not accustomed to this. I'd just come through an undergraduate school, and I'd gone to law school, and the next thing I knew, I was sleeping in a barracks on a pretty uncomfortable bed. They were getting me up very early, and they wanted me to go for runs, and sometimes they'd wake me up in the middle of the night, and they would call these fun runs. I don't know what was so fun about it. I didn't really enjoy it. And we'd do things like go through a gas chamber, and then I wouldn't get any sleep, and I'm like, this is terrible. But so that was my 19 weeks of becoming a police officer. So they took me from not a police officer to a police officer. And I remember very early, so let's jump into this conversation of character. Here's what I remember about the academy. One thing they said is, you're going to move on from this academy, and many of you will move on and have a family, or you do have family, even if you're not married. And they said, what you're going to want to do is compartmentalize the policing part of your life and the family and the personal side of your life. And they said, this will protect your family from bad things. It'll also protect them from all the emotional and all the difficult things you see, and this will be a good thing. And as a young police officer, you're like, that makes perfect sense. I should protect my family. And so you leave the academy with the idea that you're going to have this job, but your family's not going to be part of it. And that's going to be best for everybody. And so I became this guy. So again, I laugh at this, and my family probably laughs. This is the toughest looking cop picture I could find of myself in existence. So I hope some of you are like, wow, he looks pretty legit. Looks like somebody on a TV show or something. That was my hope. But I look at this again, and this is funny for me, because when I came to the police academy, I'm not sure I saw myself as a tough police officer, but I lifted weights. They got me really strong. I noticed that the way I thought about things was shaped. So there's kind of a subculture in law enforcement about how we view them versus us, the people that are maybe, trying to protect and serve. And I noticed, language is a certain way. There's just a lot of things about the police subculture, and some of them are good. And regardless, I created this, or the police academy helped me create this. And this was the person I became, 40 plus hours a week. And I liked it. Man, this is, just so you know, this was the target for me for a lot of years. Like, I just want to be a homicide detective. I want to be the guy that ducks under the tape and looks at the body and then goes in the room and interrogates the suspect. And I got there. And this is what it looked like in my mind. I was doing really, really good, and people were praising me along the way. So what's interesting, though, is just like they'd forecasted, my family started to grow during this time. So this is my family, my extended family. I love these people. Those are my 2 dogs, Brady and Lily. I love them very much. And so here's my family, and I love these people more than anybody in the world, but I had to do this, because that's what they told me to do. So now I lived this life, but I had this life, and it was really weird. As I was doing this over the years, I noticed, man, I'm just going to kind of compartmentalize this, and then there'll be this John. So that's how it looked. And this went pretty well, because as the years rolled along and I became a better and better detective, I got to work more and more cases like this. And I really liked it. I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, and I was getting accolades and commendations, and people said good work. And then I would come home, and I would turn that off, and I would just try to be somebody different. And over the years, people would start to ask questions like, hey, your job sounds really cool and that's interesting, and how do you kind of meld that with your family? And I would tell people, no problem. I just kind of live this life and I live this life. And maybe you've heard this quote, because at some point in my policing career, I read this quote from Nietzsche. I'm not a Nietzsche guy, but the quote is kind of cool, and just check this out, and it kind of stuck with me. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he doesn't become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. And I thought, man, that's really kind of an edgy, cool quote. And I'm like, but I would have told you all my time with these guys, right? All my time standing at crime scenes and then going into the room to try and talk to these guys and talking to victims. I'm like, I'm doing great. No problem at all. And Nietzsche's kind of goofy. You can chase monsters and you don't become one and nothing happens. And I think my family thought I was doing pretty well. And then I'm getting into my career now, and I've made some of my best friends. And I remember one of my buddies at some point saying, hey, have you heard of something called like emotional leakage? And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, I don't know, like I'm hearing stuff like, we're dealing with a lot of hard things and we try to compartmentalize, but at some point, this stuff just kind of starts to spill out. And I'm like, well, what's that look like? And he's like, I don't know. People are telling me that we're going to start crying at times when you shouldn't cry, and there's going to be times that you should cry, and you're not going to be crying. Your emotions are going to be out of whack. And again, I would have told you not that long ago, that's not happening to me. So again, I just, over dinner, somebody was asking me, and I said, I think I check all the boxes for all the things you would think that could help stabilize life. Married, children, good home life, lots of fun. I walk my dogs, I work out, I have faith, right? Whatever that is. So I should be okay if anybody was going to be okay. And so as somebody was starting to tell me about all this, again, I'm kind of like, I don't really know about that. That doesn't seem to make sense. Until I remember this well, that fateful night. And it was really a big deal, and it was very emotional, and I didn't see it coming. It snuck up on me, and maybe you guys have also experienced this thing I'm talking about, because it just hit me like a ton of bricks, and it rocked my world that night. I saw the movie Frozen with my little girls, and all of a sudden, there were these two sisters, and one was singing a song to the other one, and all of a sudden I felt tears coming down my cheeks, and I'm like, oh no, my little girls, my wife, my son, they're all going to see me like, so you're trying to do this, and they're like, Dad, what's wrong? And I'm like, there's that Kung Pao chicken I had for dinner or something, I don't know. But inside I'm like, man, why am I crying? I was moved by this, and my family, was trying to figure out, did Dad, was he really crying at Frozen? I was. I'm going to tell you guys, I don't know if I've ever told them, I was crying. And I remember thinking, I don't remember crying at movies like this. What's going on? And then it wasn't long after that, I'm at a funeral. And it's somebody I care about, and I'm standing there. And I remember thinking, I should be more moved by this than I am. I don't feel anything. I kind of miss them, but something's off. And now I'm like, maybe there's something to all this kind of cumulative emotional baggage going on, because this is starting to, maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, maybe it's catching up with me. I don't know. But I kept going, and life continued to be compartmentalized. You notice I called I had to come up with something clever, so I called it Character Without Compartments. I very much was living a compartmentalized life, and it was still working pretty good. I think if you would ask my wife at the time, I was compartmentalizing pretty well, although there is jokes that maybe I would come home and sometimes my kids would ask what the workday looked like, and I would start to talk about it, and my wife would look like, nope, we're not talking about murders at the dinner table or all that. But generally speaking, I thought this was working pretty good. Now, also in my life at this time, as I mentioned early on, is my faith and my outside interests. So that would include things like this side business I started to work for with my buddies, and now I'm starting to do a little bit of teaching, and whatever my other interests were, they were going on. And I started thinking so I had my faith, so I'm starting to get involved with my church even, a number of years back, and I'm really enjoying that, and I'm on this spiritual journey with the Lord, and then, I had this teaching opportunity, and that started to kind of go, and I'm now moving around. And I thought, well, if compartmentalizing my job was working pretty well, and that was to protect my family, I wonder if I should compartmentalize other parts of my life. And you're like, that's stupid, but think about your own life. Do you not start to compartmentalize pieces of your life? I think we all do. And I would have said, it's crazy, but I actually started to maybe draw lines with faith and maybe my family. And you're like, how's that work? And I'm like, well, I started to experience things, and if you have faith and you know the Lord, he was starting to show me things about myself and areas where I had sin, and I'm working. I'm like, but maybe I don't want to tell my kids or my wife or everybody. Like, that's kind of a personal thing. So it's funny, even something as beautiful as faith, I would say, man, I actually am wondering, like, maybe I'll just kind of draw some lines there. And then I'm on the road a little bit more, and I'm starting to travel, and I don't want my family to know that tires me out, and that's kind of stressful. They don't need to know that. So again, I would just kind of do this part of my life, and that would be different. And guys, as I look at this, I don't know what you think when you see this, but visually I'm like, that was my life. This is what it looks like. There's John the detective, there's John the family guy, there's John the church guy, the faith guy, and then there's John the guy that goes on the road and goes and teaches all the other police officers. And I very much was like this. And I can just tell you, I don't know if this resonates, man, I would be walking into certain situations and it literally felt like I was like, okay, so let's make sure we got the right mask, kind of the right, how do we talk, what are our feelings here? Are we a person with a lot of grace and mercy? Or am I in the cop setting where we kind of talk a certain way and it's all tough stuff? Like all that going on in my life, and I would tell you at some point I'm taking stock and I'm like, it's super compartmentalized. So if I was going to be making a few points tonight, here's point number one. If you didn't know this, life lived in compartments was not and is not good. It's not healthy. But it happens to you, right? So we have students in the room, so can't you come to something like this and we can all nod our heads, Wendt scholars and other people, and we can be like, yes, character's good, and we'll talk about different virtues, and you're like, that's good. But then we can leave here and we can go to the bar, and maybe we have too much to drink, or we stay up all night gaming, or we're looking at things that we shouldn't, and we come to class the next day and we don't have assignments done, so we have to cheat or we have to lie, and pretty soon, right, we've got different masks and different things even as students, right? So you've got the person that your teachers know or think you are. You've got the person that your family back home maybe thinks you are, right? You maybe have a job or whatever this is. And guys, just like me, you're living in compartments very quickly. And even if you're not, thinking about it, it starts to happen. So I will say this. God was very kind to me, and I hope he is to you. So as he was in my life, he was starting to work even though I was trying to cut up my character in my life and keep it all separated. So let's talk about that. I'm going to go to policing because that was kind of the big ticket item I wanted to talk about tonight. So policing did shape my character in lots of good ways. So I want to just peel this back, and I'm going to show you, and you can ask me questions about this. So how did policing shape my character? And you're like, yeah, that's a good question. Through government research, of course, right? That's the answer you thought I was going to give. But this is actually really pivotal. So I want to share something with you. I'll just pull back the curtain for how police officers, and I'm what's called an interviewer and an interrogator. So I spend a lot of time talking to victims, witnesses, and criminals. So in about 2009, the president back then, President Obama, created something. He put $15 million of federal money into something called the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group. This was top secret for a while. It's now declassified, so I'm not telling you anything that I shouldn't. And this involved organizations like the FBI, the CIA, the DIA. And what they would do, there was about 160 research studies conducted using that $15 million over the course of about a 7 or 8 year period. Some of the best and brightest that our country could come up with on this topic. So you'll see we had psychologists, we had retired military intelligence officers, we had Navy NCIS investigators, we had tons of professors who were at the top of their fields, including, this is Dr. Christian Meisner from Iowa State and Ames. He was one of the ones that was selected. So out goes the money, and we start to figure out what are the best ways for police officers to talk to people, right? And so that was all part of this endeavor. And again, I didn't see this for a number of years. This was kind of kept in the back rooms, and it was more for the military. And then at some point, you're looking at a declassified version of this Hague research. And I read it, and here's what it said. It's pretty extensive. They concluded people are relational, and they actually want to have a connection. We'll call that rapport building. That's the term we use a lot in law enforcement with other people. And you're like, wow, $15 million. And I'm like, I know, right? This is what the government does. We spend a lot of money, and we come up with some real zingers like this that you guys are like, yep, knew that one. Okay, fair enough. So people are relational, and they want to have connection with other people. See if I can get my clickers a little off here. Okay, and this is what they went to. So interestingly enough, all of our brightest thinkers when they tried to figure out how do we teach police officers to talk to other people, they actually end up settling on some of the best sales and marketing literature that's out there. So I don't know if we have any people in the sales world, but guys like Dr. Robert Cialdini have written several books called The Psychology of Persuasion and Influence, and he went on to write a second book called Persuasion. These are books that talk about how we all as human beings work. In fact, he explains it as there's kind of shortcuts in the world to having relationships and building rapport with people. And you're like, this sounds interesting. And some of you, I know what you're thinking. You're like, I'm going to get that girl to like me. I'm going to get that professor to like me. I'm going to get that promotion. A little bit. So some of this is used by the outside world. So just know that $15 million of research said, let's also tap into this stuff. And so they got these shortcuts, and I want to show you what some of these look like. So this is, if you ever go out and read the book, this is a big part of the book. It's called social influencers. So if you didn't know this about yourself and the people sitting next to you, we all, almost like a Pavlovian kind of instincts inside of us. You cannot control the fact that these things work on you, which is why they're so amazing. And so you see things like authority, reciprocity, likability. And we'll go through, I'm going to teach you a few of these, but he basically teaches salespeople how to use these things. Now, some of you I can tell, you're sitting there, it looks like a room of really nice people, and you're like, I'm uncomfortable with this whole thing. So police and people have shortcuts to building relationships and rapport. Absolutely. And some of you are like, that seems too utilitarian, like we're using people. It's not, because the author says, actually, this is the bad side of what this looks like, right? So there's a good side and bad side. So we actually all are just wired to respond to these things. But this is what psychological manipulation looks like. So this is when you use other people. So you do things like lie, or you lie by omission, or you guilt trip people, right? Or you manipulate or you exploit vulnerabilities. That's not what we're talking about. So let me take an example. So if you see reciprocity, look at some of those on that list. I want to show you how some of these work. So let's take the concept of reciprocity. Reciprocity says this: we as human beings, me and you, we want to repay in kind when people provide something to us, what another person has provided us. So let me give you some examples. So I'm going to take two here, maybe three. So take the first one, the pack of gum. So you're on a road trip sometime. This has happened to all of us. And all of a sudden you're in a group of people in the car and you have to go to the bathroom. And the gas station's coming up, so you don't want to be the one who has to go to the bathroom already, so you know what you do. You're like, hey, how's everybody doing? And everybody's like, no, we're good. And you're like, shoot. Okay, you look at the gas tank's pretty full, you just had food. You're like, okay, guys, I have to go to the bathroom. So you pull over and you run in. And you use the gas station bathroom, and if you've done this, as you're walking out of the bathroom, you feel like laser eyes from the convenience store clerk, like they're looking at you like you did not buy anything in our store, you didn't get any gas, and you're kind of like this. So what do? Something inside of you says, I need to buy something, right? So you're like, I know what I'll do, I'll buy the pack of gum. Now back years ago, this was super simple because you'd buy the little pack of like spearmint and it was like a quarter, right? So you're like, all right, here's my quarter for the bathroom or whatever. But now I go in and I throw a pack up there and the guy's like, that'll be like $3.50. And I'm like, no, I didn't want the box. I just needed the one pack. And he's like, no, that's it. So I buy the gum, and as I walk out, I'm like, okay, so thank you for letting me use your bathroom. That was very kind of you. You could have been a little kinder and it could have been a little cleaner, but thank you. And in return, I'm gonna buy gum. So just know what you're experiencing there. That is actually a social influencer of reciprocity. You feel a need because of that. So let's go to Sam's Club. So Saturday at Sam's Club is like sample day, right? Have you been there? At the Turbett house, we just call this free lunch day, right? So we load the kids up and we go over and we tell them to make a few laps around all the sample things. And so think about that. So you go to Sam's and what do they have? They've got the little pieces of chicken and there's a cup of juice and there's the coffee and some ice cream and you're getting that. What is Sam's Club up to when they're doing that? And you're like, yeah, they're trying to hook you with all those delicious little... Actually, guys, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. Sam's does not care per se if you buy the chicken, the juice, the coffee, or the ice cream. Let me tell you what they're doing. They're actually tapping into social influence. So reciprocity says, if we give them enough things, little pieces of chicken, little swigs of coffee, you know what you're going to do? You will feel socially obligated to do something nice for Sam's. Do you know what that means? You throw more crap in your cart and you check out with a bill that's like 4 times what you thought it was going to be. That is reciprocity. Let me give another example. Hopefully this is legal drinkers in the room, right? But let's say you go out and somebody buys you a drink. Think about this. you feel obligated to try and buy them a drink back, most of you, right? To buy them a drink back before they leave. But let's say they get out before you buy the drink back. What do? The next time you see them, like, dude, I owe you a drink, right? Or I owe you a meal, whatever that is. So we feel socially obligated as people do things for us. So think about this concept of social influence. This became really pivotal. So if I was what we call an evidence-based police officer now in 2025, what could I initiate and invite? How could I start to get reciprocation going when I'm sitting down to talk to maybe a victim or a witness, or let's even say a suspect, somebody who's committed a crime? What would that look like? Now, what I'm not talking about, please, since this is being live streamed and recorded, we're not giving bags of cash to people to confess or something, and we're not threatening them. That's not what we're talking about. So what could I give someone if I wanted to just get them to reciprocate and maybe give back to me? So let's think about that. When I walk through a door, which you're going to see me do a few times, things I do. Immediately, eye contact, right? I walk up, handshake. I introduce myself. Hey, I'm John. I'm not a special agent or whoever I am. I'm just John. I sit down. Notice my tone that I'm trying to give, right? I'm giving a tone like if I talk to some of my family and friends or like I'm talking to you today, right? Hey, I brought a couple cups of coffee. Let's sit down, right? And the idea is, wow, if I do these things, if I initiate and invite, man, what are they going to give back? Hopefully some conversation, right? And if you're like, wow, that seems crazy and underhanded, I thought about this week. We had about 3 or 4 different people come over to our house as guests this week at different times. Guess what I do? They come in my door, I shake their hand, hey, how's it going, right? You know, great to see them. They sit down, what do? We ask, hey, would you like a beverage? Do you want a drink? Can I get you something? Really what we're advocating for is being good human beings, right? So think about this as we start to warm up to these ideas of social influence. So, all right, now I told you were wowed. $15 million of government research. Here's one of the leading experts that we paid. I want you to listen to how she is going to summarize $15 million and human interactions that we want police officers to try and utilize. Let's listen to her.
In terms of what interrogators, and these are the ones with experience, and about half of our sample had high-value target experience. What do they say is most effective at eliciting reliable information? It's relationship and rapport building skills. Building a connection, understanding who they're talking to, developing mutual respect and trust. Those are the things that they say ultimately will elicit reliable information from people. What do they say doesn't work? Confrontational and competitive approaches. So expressing anger and impatience and frustration, threatening the suspect with non-compliance or the consequences of non-compliance or non-cooperation. They say that's counterproductive.
Okay, so you're like, wow, that's amazing. So let me see. So we're supposed to build relationships, make connections with people. People actually respond best in this world. Apparently, again, you can't help it. You respond best when I show you mutual respect, and I actually do things that indicate I trust you and that I think you're trusting me. An amazing fact, did you know this? People don't like it when you're competitive and confrontational. It's true of a murderer. It's true of the people that you hang out with. So I put this to test this week. So I'm playing Settlers of Catan this week with like my family, right? And I find this goes really, really well amongst my family and friends when I have mutual respect and I give and receive trust in the game. When does the game start to go bad? When John becomes too competitive and too confrontational. Nobody likes John like that, right? So again, you're like, wow, this is amazing. You're telling us that $15 million of research says, oh, be genuinely nice to people and they're going to respond well. That's exactly what I was learning as a police officer. So you leave here tonight knowing that you've got a $15 million okay to just be a nice person to people and they're going to respond well. That's what we're getting from the Higg research. So let me show you bad example, good example in my world. Everybody ready? So we're going to go with the guy on the left. Here's a gruff detective, a police officer who apparently doesn't know some of this. Let's watch him confront somebody who tried to conspire to have her husband killed. He walks in to talk to her.
Go ahead, Elliot. Drink some water. Now, you know that I advise you of your rights, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The game's over with. Okay? There's no more games with you and I. Now we're going to get down to serious business.
Now we're going to get down to serious business. This is what they're talking about. This is competitive and confrontational. Now some of you are like, well, I didn't even think that was that bad. That's because we've been groomed on a culture of Chicago PD, Hawaii 5-0, whatever you're used to for your interrogation room sequences, we're pretty used to that. But I want to show you actually one of my colleagues. This was a defining moment in my law enforcement career. So as I'm learning about, actually showing people respect and kindness, and they will reciprocate, they're going to tend to talk. I want you to watch this on the right. This is my colleague in the DCI. The girl you're seeing, I won't share her name, she's an adult now, she was trafficked. And you'll notice the time on this, we're in the middle of the night. This girl has just been recovered out of a hotel, away from the people that were trafficking her. She's had a horrific life. And we have a lot of business to get down to. As this guy said, we got to get down to business. In fact, I'll just be honest, human trafficking is difficult, but by the time we catch up to these girls, they almost seem to be complicit in some of the activity, right? So do we have a victim of a crime? Do we have somebody who's actually furthering a criminal enterprise? We got to find out all kinds of stuff. We got people out there. So let's watch this officer and see what her first move is when she sits down with somebody who's in the middle of a trafficking situation. They've just removed her from her pimp. Let's see what happens.
Hey, how are you? Hi. It's so good to see you safe. So, hey, I'm Holly Witt. I'm a state police officer, okay? And this is John Turbett. He's a state police officer too.
Okay.
So nice to meet you.
You have a small head.
Come here. I'm so glad you're safe. I'm so glad you're
You have
safe.
really pretty eyes.
Oh, thank you, dear. There's so many people that are looking for you and worried about you and caring about you. And right now, we just want to talk and get. Do you want to grab another chair? We just want to get. Can you just let's make a list so we're organized when we go out to the hotel and figure out what you have there that's important to you that you want to take with.
Thank goodness I say almost nothing for the entire interview for like 3 hours. It's the best thing I ever did was zip it and watch my colleague Holly go. A few months before this, I had been in a similar situation with another gal, and guess what I had done? I walked in and I referred to what she was doing as prostitution, and I referred to her as a prostitute. How do you think that went? Miserably, right? She rightfully got very mad. She was throwing things at me. She's swearing at me. Needless to say, we have no relationship and no rapport building. But let's look at my colleague Holly. What'd she do? She actually came around the desk. She hugs this girl, and she says, "Oh, honey," right? People really care for you and love you. They've been worried about you. And notice she doesn't start with her agenda. What's she say? She says, "Okay, the first thing I need to do is, what's important to you? Where are the things that are most important? What's back at that hotel? How can we deal with what's going on in your world?" This conversation takes a totally different look, doesn't it? So you're like, wow, that's pretty cool. That works really well with a girl like that. So one more thing, let me teach you. So you now know about reciprocity. I want to talk to you about something called self-disclosure. So if you're taking a few notes, here's more $15 million of research to make you into a better human being with better character. So self-disclosure says people like to tell their story, especially after you tell them a little bit of your story. So you disclose something about yourself, the response inside most human beings will be, I should turn around and tell you something about me. So guess what happens? As I tell people about my family or my dogs or my faith, almost always I can tell you now, I'm on a 25-year experiment, they turn around and disclose back. And it's almost reciprocal for the depth of information I provide goes to the depth of information they disclose back. So if I say, I have a family, they'll be like, I have a family. If I say, I'm married, they might tell me about a girlfriend or whatever's going on. If I'm like, I have 4 kids, their names are X, Y, and Z, guess what they do next? The next thing I know, they are just volunteering to me names in their family, right? If I start to talk about my dogs or my pets, they're in. If I say something about my faith, or I notice that they have maybe a cross or a tattoo or something, and I'm like, hey, faith is important to me, we now begin to disclose to each other about faith. So self-disclosure says you are willing to be transparent and vulnerable. People will respond in like kind. So again, think about that. How does a police officer, and then later you as a human being, how do you initiate and invite self-disclosure in your life or in my life? What does that look like? So again, very easy when we talk about this maybe with the trafficking victim. You're kind of touched by her. You're like, yeah, you should do that for her. But what about the guy in the corner? Or what about this guy? So I've got to move sometimes from her and walk across the hallway, and then I have to go talk to the guy who actually committed the crime. Do we do it totally different there? Is that when I kind of go Chicago PD on him? Well, it's actually not. So here's what I want to show you. This is a couple-minute clip out of an actual police interrogation I did, and I'll just tell you enough here. This guy, just hours before this, shot and killed a fellow police officer that I knew, right? He actually later said he intended to kill more police officers. He was stopped in a standoff situation, so he's now in custody. He's just gotten there, and I've been asked to go in and try and interview and interrogate. Let's get inside and see if he'll confess and tell everything that was going on. By the way, right before I walk in the door, people are curious what's going on. I'm standing out in the hallway with a group of police officers. Some of them are crying. This is a really bad situation. They knew this guy. And I'm like, guys, what do you know about the guy I'm walking in with? Because they're local. And they said, he hates police officers. Get ready. He's probably just going to jump you and start fighting you. We'll be in there right away. We'll help you out. And I'm like, okay, great. That's super helpful. I'll go in and have a great conversation now, right? So here we go. This is me walking in. So I've just splashed some water on my face. What do you say to somebody who's just done this? How do we have this conversation?
Hey, Corey, this is the gentleman that wants to talk to you.
Hey, Corey, how you doing? I'm John. How you doing, man? Rough morning, huh?
Huh?
Rough morning.
Right.
Did I understand you got some breakfast and?
Right.
Okay. Do you need something more to eat or drink, or?
No, I'm all right.
Okay. Have you got to use the bathroom, or? You're good with all that?
Yeah.
Man. Okay. Well, I'm an officer, police officer as well, and I know this was a really a tough morning, and I know there's been some build up for you with this and some things going on in your life. At least that's what I understand. And Corey, if you're okay, what I'd like to do is sit down and talk to you a little bit about what's been going on.
He's nodding his head a little bit.
Maybe you'd like somebody to maybe talk to right now and help make some sense of things. And I'd love to be that guy right now.
Okay.
And sit down and talk to you if I can do that. I think somebody had gone over some things with you, some rights earlier. You understand those?
Right.
Okay. I've got those here too, and I'll just read through those with you real quick, just so you know. I know you've been read before, but I've got it here. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to consult with a lawyer before you answer any questions. If you make any statement, and have a lawyer present during questioning. And if you can't afford one will be provided for you free of cost. That's the same thing that somebody else said. Okay, great. And you understand that?
Right.
Okay. And you're cool talking to me for a little bit?
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
What do we say now?
Thank you. Oh, man. Do you have some family?
Yeah.
Do you have a wife or children? Or
No, I do not.
Okay.
I'm mom and dad.
You got mom and dad. Are they in the area too?
Yes.
Okay. You mind if I just take a couple notes? Is that
Yeah,
cool?
go.
Okay. I'm just got a notepad here. I'll just take a few. And it's Corey, right?
Yep.
Corey, what's your last name?
Trott, T-R-O-T-T.
Okay. Is there some other tracks in the area?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not from around here, but I think I'm around enough. I'm actually
Self-disclosure.
Clear over in Dubuque.
Oh, okay.
You ever get that far east?
Not really, no.
Yeah. I'm a ways from home.
But by Cedar Rapids area.
Yep, and even a little further east. I'm actually originally from Cedar
I'm from
Rapids.
there.
That's where I was born and raised. Spent a lot of time there, and then moved to Dubuque. It's a little bit further east, over on the Mississippi over there.
Oh, yeah.
You could step from Dubuque and you'd be in Wisconsin, or another step you'd be in Illinois. You're right there. You're kind
But
of.
that's not the Quad Cities?
No. That's a little bit. That's about an hour away. So, but that's all kind of relatively close. So you got mom and dad in the area?
Right. Mom and dad, 2 sisters and a brother.
Okay.
I got 2 sisters, I got a brother. He goes on, he actually tells me about all the dynamics in his family. So think about that. We go from, man, a really bad situation, and all of a sudden this guy's talking. I don't know why that is, other than you guys saw lots of reciprocity and self-disclosure. So one more, just helping you guys out. I want to build some good character so you get your money's worth tonight. So let me help you out. I'm going to peel back a little more. The other thing they told me as a police officer now that I want to do is be a good active listener. So I want to draw people into conversation, and I always want to try and get more detail and more depth out of them. And here's something really simple. You can just take this home tonight. You can snap a picture if you've never heard of it. We call it Ted's Pie. Here you go. So the government tells me, man, we've studied people up and down with the brightest minds, and what you need to do is first say one of these. So, man, tell me, or hey, could you explain to me, or man, describe that to me, or can you show me, and then you just hook it up with one of these over here, precisely, in detail, or exactly. right? So this is so fun. You can just mix and match. You can do it anyway. You can come up with all kinds of fun combinations. So as you're talking to somebody next time and you're like, how do I get us into deeper and better conversation? You're like, man, that's crazy. Can you tell me in detail about that more? Or, man, show me, exactly what that looked like, what you're telling me. And we're told that this invites great conversation. And guys, I'll just tell you, sometimes as a cop, I can't even remember Ted's pie. I'm like, ooh, I'm on overload. So you always just are like, hey, tell me more. Tell me more about that. That's just my default. So if you ever talk to me, now you know all my secrets. You're going to be like, this guy seems like pretty interested in what's going on. Man, I'm just like, hey, can you tell me more, what's going on with that? Tell me precisely what you're thinking about. This is part of being a good active listener, right? So what does this look like for some of you? Man, my family, they say I haven't always listened the best. I remember back in college, somebody I really cared about dearly, and this was one of those humbling kind of moments. Have you been there? They actually stopped me mid-conversation and they were mad, and they cared about me, and they said, hey, I'm actually really upset because it seems like when you ask me a question, you are already formulating what you're going to say next or whatever, even the next question, but you don't even actually seem to listen to what I'm saying. And I'm just like, I remember I was just like, man, I was like, that sounds like a terrible person. That does not sound like a person with a lot of character. So now I'm told, hey, what I need to do is I'm actually going to listen. I'm going to nod. I'm going to smile. And I'm actually going to listen well enough that I can ask some follow-up questions. So let's go back to John. Here's John all cut up again, right? I'm chugging through life. And I remember I've got everything compartmentalized, but man, I'm learning some super cool things on the policing side, right? It's going pretty good. This is all going on. And so I want to talk about some of the other areas for just a couple minutes, if I could. So despite my efforts to compartmentalize my life, God was teaching me character through the research and the training I had. And I'm learning that people, even introverts and extroverts, we're all basically relational people, and we all respond, and we all actually want to tell our story. We want to be heard. And so this is all happening. But let me talk to you about my family. And a lot of my family and friends are here, so I don't want to embarrass them. But my wife and I have been married for coming up on 27 years. We've been parenting now for about 24 years. And so think about that, 27 years being married to the same amazing woman, 24 years of parenting and being half of this parenting team that parents. And I would tell you, if God was shaping my character through policing and all the things about working on that, the family is like that on steroids, right? So as you, and I know some of you that are married and you have kids, you can agree with this. This is the place, my family and friends, where lots of character formation has happened in my life. And if I can, I want to just share from you, because my faith is important. If you go to the Old Testament portion of your Bible, it talks about the job of the family, and often it's the parents' job is to teach the coming generation about God, right? So we go to places like Deuteronomy 10:19 in my Bible, and it says this: learn to love God's ways and learn them and get them inside of you, and then get them inside of your children. This is what God says. And listen to what he says. This is super relational and beautiful. Talk about them wherever you are, sitting at home or walking in the street with your kids. Talk about them from the time you get up in the morning to the time when you fall into bed at night. Family, parents, right? Your job is to pass that along. I don't know if you know this, the book of Proverbs in the Bible, this is largely about a father trying to teach his son about life and character, the very thing that we're talking about. And I would say, man, it's been a great joy for me to try and pass along my love for the Lord and character to my children. Now, the other side of this in the Bible I just would want to reference is, in other places, God actually talks about the sinfulness or my character shortcomings. They're going to have negative impacts on my kids and their kids and maybe their kids. It says up to 3 or 4 generations, and I'm like, man, that's heavy, right? So think about this. Anybody in the room, even if you're a young person, you don't have children yet, your moral shortcomings, your lack of character, it will pay forward to your children and their children. I'm like, that's really heavy. But I'm here to talk about a lot of my detective work and all this, but I do want to say that, again, God has done the most work on me, probably through my marriage and my family. In fact, I would say it in front of them, I think the person who's benefited the most from my family is probably me. I know I'm supposed to be the dad and the teacher, but I'm like, I think God and his kindness has done much. And I want to read a quote from you, if I can. This is from a guy named Herman Bavinck. He's a Dutch theologian. He was a pastor. He was a politician. He was a father. And listen to how he describes this very thing about moms and dads and parents and how God shapes character through that. The family exerts a reforming power upon who? The parents. Who would recognize in that sensible, dutiful father the carefree youth that he used to be. And who would have imagined that the lighthearted girl would later be changed by her child into a mother, somebody who renders the greatest sacrifice with joyful acquiescence? Here we go. The family transforms ambition into service, stinginess into generosity. The weak become strong. Cowards turn into heroes. Coarse fathers, they turn into mild lambs. Tender-hearted mothers turn into ferocious lionesses. Imagine there was no marriage and family, humanity would, he says, turn into a pigsty. That's the family shaping character. So families act as this amazing agent of change in your life, and that same guy went on to say the family is the school of life because it is the fountain and the hearth of life. So I don't want to make it sound like my family has been all amazing experiences. We have certainly had our share of great family dinners and trips and board games and walks. But can I just say, without going into specifics, my family has endured life, death, times of not very much, times of quite a bit, terrible sickness, chronic pain, life-threatening ER visits, major surgeries, medical miracles, but also medical mistakes and letdowns. We've been on that end of it. We've also seen months and years with no answers on the medical side. We didn't invite any of this, and we probably wouldn't want to repeat a lot of it, but we are really thankful for all of it, because that's how the Lord has chosen to work, is through our family. And all of this has left me, like so many parents, humbled, because I'm supposed to be the dad and the husband that's looked to for answers, and I would just admit to you, oftentimes I have none, or the answers that I put forward seem weak or unhelpful. But I do have great reason for hope. God has been super faithful, and he has led our family, and I have watched him grow all of our character, and I just want to encourage you. So my ability to now sit down with people and empathize and pray with them, if you ever would happen to sit down with me, because of what's happened in my family, that's all been accelerated. The Lord has taught me much about character. So I would just kind of wrap that little thing and say this: why on earth would you ever compartmentalize what is probably the greatest training ground and place where your character is formed? We should be sharing these pieces of ourselves with the rest of the world, and yet I was living a lot of my life with that kind of dissected, and I was intentionally not doing that. My faith I've referenced before, so as you move down the line, I just want to talk about this for a minute. I've been ministered to, and I've gotten to minister to others. I regularly get to meet with people from my church. I got to do it this morning and just talk and pray with them. I love doing that. I get to preach at the chapel down here on our Sunday service, maybe every third or fourth week. I've been honored and I've been blessed to marry 2 couples in the last 60 days. I never knew that I'd be able to do that. These are all amazing things that are just changing my character and humbling me. In fact, last year, can I tell you about a trip I got to take with some people from our church? We went to Ukraine, and we worked on a team of about a dozen people, and I made new friends, guys from Germany and Sweden and Mexico and Canada. And for 5 days, we would travel from a relatively safe place to a pretty unsafe place, a village that had been bombed out and destroyed by the Russians in an invasion about 18 months prior. And what you're seeing here, I'll actually show you this, is the gentleman who's standing there in the sweatpants and the gray t-shirts. That was the leader of the village that we were working in. And he told us of what his village used to look like. He was 3rd or 4th generation in this small village. He was one of the few people left. Many people had been killed. They'd had to relocate. And he told us how he was twice almost executed. So this guy was, on one of those occasions, taken out of his house while his family was present. It was on his daughter's birthday, and he was made to kneel out in the front yard, and they were going to execute him as his family watched through the window. Obviously, he was spared. And what did he tell us in this conversation? I remember really well through a translator. He said he believed that God had kept him alive so he could help rebuild his village and to see better days. He had hope. And then the gal before, I actually took these out of order. This is Ilona. She's a widowed woman who had a Russian rocket land in her front yard. What you're seeing in this first picture on the left, if you see that right to the left of her, that's the remains of a rocket that landed in her yard. And what you see on the right is her house, completely destroyed. And as we stood and listened to her, the people that were supposed to go and serve and love, I think she thought we were on the verge of tears because she was trying to console my wife and I and other people on the team. I'll be okay. God's going to provide for me. Man, I was super blessed. How is my character not changing in these situations. My faith is causing me to meet people. So I've been blessed to be part of a church leadership team, and I would just invite you. We'll be down here on Sundays at 10:30 in the morning. Thursday nights, the Salt Company. We're down here on 7 p.m. I'll just make an unabashed claim and pitch to you for that, to come and join us. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is this research and training group, the CTK Group. And this is just another interesting place. And so I joined up with a couple of my friends. The goal was to try and change the landscape of interview and interrogation. And what I found that did is that actually humbled me more. Because I'm constantly in front of rooms of officers, and I realize they've humbled themselves because they've come to get better. And I realized, wow, when you come into that situation, you're actually exposing yourself and letting yourself be vulnerable, and you're willing to try and get better at what you do. And all that's done is humble me up front and say, man, this is amazing to be able to stand in front of my peers and my colleagues and get to do that with them. So the best I can do now when I teach, I'm like, well, if I'm going to be transparent, I get up and I say, hey guys, I'm just a student of the game. And I'm going to try and bless you with whatever's going on in my life, and I'm going to share some of that very research that we were talking about, and we're going to see if we can do that. So what I'd like to do in my last few minutes, this is interesting. So I got to do a Dateline episode. This is like a once-in-a-career thing. I never thought this would happen. I don't know if you recognize this guy. His name is Keith Morrison. He's probably the most well-known Dateline correspondent, and just by the way things shook out, this is who did the episode that I was on. And so I was sent to Chicago to spend about a half day with Keith, and we just sit there and talk for 4 hours about interview and interrogation. And I'm telling him about some of the things I told you. And I want you to look. If he looks a little bit puzzled, he's listening to me, and I'm telling him about being a good human being. And I'm like, I'm really trying to just let character kind of go and just be a good person and talk to people. Listen to his question and his conclusion. He's going to say, I'm a little confused here. Tell me about the approach. How is it that you're now doing this interview and interrogation thing?
What's the approach?
As I'm sitting here talking to you, this is really natural, right? This is no problem. I'm as comfortable here as I would be talking to a buddy. And I'm always asking myself when I'm sitting down with someone, how can I get us to that point as quickly as possible? And I really want people to not see me as Special Agent John Turbett. I want to be John, and you're Keith, and we're going to talk about something. It's difficult.
More like you're a, counselor or pastor or something like that.
Exactly, Keith. That's what I am. I'm a pastor on the side, right? So I'm like, man, for me, this was when it was all starting to click. I'm like, I'm not going to be John the detective, and then I'm not going to be John at church, Faith John. I'm not going to be John at home. I really want to be the same John everywhere I go. So if I could, I told you I didn't want to highlight too many of the bad guys. This is my collage of the other side of it. So this would look fairly random to you, but let me just take a couple minutes. So here's what you're looking at. Up at the top, if I start up there, the two fingers are pointing at a gravestone. It's a war memorial. And so that's a police officer's hand and a victim who had their family member killed. And they said, hey, now that we're all done with this whole process of the investigation and the criminal trial, you've been so good to me. Would you go with my family and go to a war memorial of someone, in our family? And the officer goes and they take a picture. Or when I keep working my way around, here's somebody who was having trouble. They were having trouble being able to show up to court and tell their story. It was very scary for them. And you see, we have an officer with cookies, and we didn't just buy them Oreos. Man, they got a box of crumble cookies, and they're sharing this moment. That's a victim of a crime. So when you start to think about, man, what could policing look like? But more importantly, what could your life look like if you actually started to let your character overflow into all these areas? The third one is you work your way around the playlist. This is pretty personal to me. This is a young lady who was kidnapped and sexually abused. Her life was threatened with a gun to her head. She was zip-tied, and the only reason she got away from her captor is he got distracted for a few minutes, and she ran out the door and knocked on the neighbor's house. That saved her life. So here we are, much, much later. I've spent a ton of time with her and her parents as we're moving closer and closer to a criminal trial. And we would sit down, and she's like, can we listen to music? And I'm like, sure, I've got Spotify. And I'm like, how about we listen to your playlist? And I'm like, I don't know what this is going to be like. And so this is the PG version of her playlist, right? Like if I would show the whole thing, it would be lots of the little E's and stuff that I was like, wow, that's crazy. But these songs I didn't really know were like before. And after I spent a number of months and letting her run the playlist, these are now on my playlist. This, for me, is memories of what it's like when I invest in somebody's character. It's the one on the bottom. This is a father whose daughter was brutally killed in our state. And the guy that killed his adult daughter wanted her to be found at some point because that brought him some kind of excitement. And in fact, when she didn't get found, this victim, he went back out to display the corpse so it could be found. And it was found, and it was later identified by law enforcement. So they had to go and tell this father that, hey, we've actually found your missing daughter, and she's been killed. When the officers went to the door, that same week, he found out that his wife had cancer and she was going to die, and she ultimately did. But as this officer starts to talk to this guy and meet with him time and time again, he tells the officer, the only reason I have hope right now, because my wife is likely going to pass and I've now found out my daughter was murdered, is my hope and my faith in Jesus. And the officer says, he doesn't compartmentalize, he says, me too. I actually share that same faith. And now look what happens. This is now a couple years later. That father texts messages with the officer all the time. So here he's bought a motorcycle and he's on a trip and he says, hey, check this out. As we keep going, the gal up there, man, she's at a residential facility. That's another victim of a crime. She had, when she got to go outside a little bit, she'd planted that hosta. She found it in a ditch and she thought that was amazing. And she asked the officer, hey, would you take my picture with the plant that I planted? It was just a little hosta. The gal over here, man, another victim whose family member was killed in a homicide. She invites this officer to a high school graduation. And finally, the last one, also another one very personal to me. What you see is it's just a little piece of glass with a heart on it. That's from about a 13-year-old girl. I worked the case. Her mother was killed because it was a domestic violence situation. The live-in boyfriend had punched this woman so hard that ultimately it killed her, did brain damage, and this little girl was left without a mother. And here we are about 18 months later at trial, and I'm getting ready, and I'm in a suit like this, and I'm staring out the window because I'm kind of nervous about trial. And she and I have gotten to know each other over the course of time. We've talked lots about our families. And she comes over to me, and she doesn't say a whole lot, and she does this with her hand, and I'm like, what do you got? And she puts this little glass thing with a heart in my hand. And she's like, good luck. Go do what you have to do in there. And I'm like I'm a mess, right? Like I'm in tears, this little 13-year-old girl. And this sits exactly where you see it right there. It sits in my center console. And it's a reminder to me, like, man, you open up your life to people. You open up your life to 13-year-old girls that lost their mom. That's what we would do. So guys, as I land the plane on this, I just want to say, I feel completely inadequate to get up here in front of all these people, a lot of them I know, and talk about character. I'm like the kind of character that you've seen and we've talked about. I don't have it all the time. In fact, I don't have it enough. I don't really do all this that well sometimes. In fact, there's only one person that ever had character like this that was consistent and daily, and that was Jesus, right? And he was the one that was able to have character like this. And so the way that you have character in life, I believe it's pretty clear, is you go to the source of character, right? So you ask him for forgiveness for all the times we haven't been able to display the kind of character we should. Man, and we ask him to give us a new heart, one that's inclined to actually to do these kinds of things, right? To now wanting to do these, even though we don't always do them. And it's interesting, the Bible says this. There's a Bible verse in Proverbs, and it says, man, when it comes to character, it says it's like a crucible is for silver, and a smelter or a furnace is for gold, and the Lord is the tester of hearts. So it's saying that character, real character, somehow is tested in the fires of life. And man, the Lord sees what's going on in our heart. And I heard a story about this. This is amazing. So they actually asked a real silver or goldsmith, and they said, hey, have you seen this Bible verse? Is this true? And he's like, oh yeah. Crucibles, furnaces, smelters, they work great. They do a really good job of getting impurities off of gold and silver. And they said, well, Mr. Master Silversmith, how do you know when the silver or the gold is getting good? How do you know when it's pure, when the process is done? And he smiled and he said, oh, it's actually very easy. A master or a smith looks at that and he said, at the time that I can see my reflection in that gold or silver, I know that the process is complete because it reflects back the image of the master or the smith. And this is why I think we see this, man. The Lord, guys, the idea for your life and my life is not to just be try a little harder and be a little bit better. It's to actually come before the Lord and ask him to start to refine you, right? And ultimately, we'll know that this is working because your life is going to look like this. It's going to start to reflect more of that character from God. That's how we'll know that something's going on. And the last thing I want to share with you is from the Apostle Paul. So this is my new life. I'm just saying this before you. I don't live it perfectly. My family's here. They can all nod and say he sure doesn't lead this perfectly. But this is what Paul said. So if I'm now trying to have the same character in all of these venues, no more lines, no more cutting up John, John's the same all the time, here's what he said. We cared so much for you that we were pleased to share with you not only the gospel of God, not just the good news of Jesus and what he can do in your life, but also our own lives because you had come so dear to us. So I just want to look at that, guys. This is what Character Without Compartments is. This is what my challenge would be to you. So whatever your compartments are, wherever you're living your life as a student or an adult out there, man, would we be so kind to share our lives with one another and not compartmentalize your character? I would challenge you to quit trying to figure out how you can live these little segments of life so nobody knows and chop it up and say, man, what could life look like if it was actually transparent and I actually loved people the same throughout all of my life? Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. So here's, speaking of humility and vulnerability, this is it for me. So I want to open this for Q&A for a few minutes. This can be about character. This can be about policing. This can be about interview and interrogation if you have questions on that. I'm really open to any questions. And so I would just encourage, does anybody have maybe a question? I think we have a microphone out there, so you don't have to yell. Yes. Nathan's got, so if somebody has a hand and wants to ask a question, I would love to field a few questions. So let me know. Yeah, over here. Thank you. All right, yeah, you do have a loud voice.
So you talked about when you're, the difficulty with interviewees, when you come in confrontational,
Yes.
those types of things. Is there a point where it becomes necessary? And if so, how would you figure out when that point is?
Yeah, so I think he's asking, like, is there a point as a police officer when you're talking to, say, a suspect, right? Somebody who's committed a crime, when it does get maybe confrontational or competitive or whatever those words are that I use. And the answer is, man, I'm always tempted to go there. And I think here's the big surprise. After we've had a really good discussion, and I'm like, hey, you've told me everything you can, I will say, hey, at this point, man, we do believe that there's more to this story, that you actually were involved in this. And instead of getting competitive and confrontational, the next thing for us is actually, I will start to tell stories and I'll start to give justifications and say, I think this reminds me of something in life, right? And I'll tell a story and say, and I think that's where you're at. Actually, this is what's going on. So we actually still, all the way till the end, we really try to avoid confrontation and competitiveness as much as possible. Yes, you can imagine in situations with criminals, there are times when they're yelling back or they're getting mad, but we're always trying to meet that with something else. So not confrontation as best we can, but I'm literally trying to provide reasons now, why I think they committed that crime and say, I think I know why you did this. And we're looking for them to say, yeah, you're exactly right. So another question, interview and interrogation, policing, man, character across some of these boundaries in life. Anybody else with a question? And I'd love to take some. Yeah, over here.
Was there a specific experience or situation that made you want to start the CTK Group?
Yeah, that's awesome. So she's asking why I helped form up this company, the CTK Group. I think it was like 10 years of seeing the confrontational competitiveness, watching myself walk in rooms and be frustrated by the fact that we just weren't doing this well. And I think as a police officer, I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I think at the same time, I would just say, man, my character journey that I'm showing you guys that I'm on, as my faith is growing, as I'm learning things, I'm like, I am looking for how can I walk into a room and actually just have good conversations with people. And the CTK Group for that was literally an extension of how do I just help other people have better and better conversations, and how do we do that on a work basis. So I think it was a lot of frustration of what I see in law enforcement is not very good, and what I saw in my own life wasn't very good. So now I'm just like, man, I want to be part of the solution and try and help infuse a little more character into the interview and interrogation process around the country. Thank you. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Have you been able to see results from the program that you've built?
Yeah, totally. It's actually, so you can gauge results in a couple ways. I mean, certainly you do at some point need to have criminals confessing, right? That is part of to say that it works. But I would say now when we testify in court, not just me, but other officers, what I would love is if you guys are ever on a jury and you see an interrogation done well, where an officer is not confronting, where they're actually listening and then they're asking questions and we're doing this, what we see juries do now is they nod their head and they're like, wow, that's really, that's something. And so I think what we're seeing is more buy-in and understanding understanding from the public that interrogation doesn't have to look like what we see on Friday and Saturday night. So the results are good. We do see people confess. And I want to be clear, even the win sometimes with who we think is a suspect is we were wrong. Sometimes as the story unfolds, we figure out the other way. But way more information. So the way we're doing this, I would just say 25 to 40% more information is coming into the interview room from victims, witnesses, and suspects. So that's a win. Way more information and better results. And I think it's something that we can be proud of as police officers. So I do think it's working. It's a slow shift. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. She asked, how's the emotional leakage going? That's kind of personal, but it's a great question. I would say, I continue to lean into the Lord. I'm just going to say that again. I mean, the greatest defense in all of this is for me to ask Him to take care of me, right? And to heal those parts, right? I mean, I've seen things. I can't undo some of the things I've seen. I've had way too many conversations I probably wish I wouldn't have had. So what I can do is I can ask for the Creator. I can ask the Lord to mend those things up. And then, man, I'm just blessed. My family's here. I mean, they come out to hear something like this. You have to have that community around you. And I would just say, I did not mean to make somebody feel bad if you don't have that kind of family, or you're sitting here at college and you're like, I'm not surrounded by my family, John, so that's bogus. Here's what I'd say. Man, a great place to find that family is in a church community, right? And I would just say, if you're a student on this campus in particular, we're like 300 yards that way. Thursday nights at 7 o'clock, Sunday mornings at 10:30. There is a family that can love you and do those things. So, man, I'm just putting myself humbly into that situation. I mean, there's a vulnerability to just say, I need my family to work through this stuff, and I need the Lord to heal me. So some humility, and I'd say that's probably where I'm at. I think I'm doing pretty good, but it does take its toll on you. Like others of you have jobs that take its toll as well. I think that's a good question. Yes, back there.
Were you always a believer, or did you become a believer since you've been a policeman?
That's a great question, too. I was a believer before I became a police officer, but I would say, like anybody here who's a believer, man, as the Lord has grown me, the value of my faith is just intensifying readily. And I think the things that I see drive me back to the Lord in humility. And I'm just like, Lord, man, this world doesn't make sense without you. You're my hope. So I would say I was a believer, but praise the Lord, man, my sanctification, my growth in Him has been off the charts because He's kind. Not because I'm a great person, I'm not, but He's good. So, yeah. Yeah, one more question? Somebody else. Was there another one? Yeah, right here. Why did I want to? Yeah, that's a good one too. I did have somebody close to me when I was young, and I thought I saw injustice and somebody who couldn't speak up. And I remember I was pretty young, and I just remember that always stuck with me. It was a female that I loved very dearly, and I'm like, man, something in me just said I would love to be a voice for that person someday. I didn't even know what that meant. And then eventually this is kind of how the Lord just directed my path. So I would say now it's very interesting. Now I'm a 50-year-old guy. When I work a sex abuse case or a crime against a woman, those are near and dear to me. So somewhere in that piece for me was, man, could I help somebody who maybe couldn't get the help otherwise? So those cases mean the world to me. So, yeah. Okay, so Liza, we're out of time.
Let's just give John Turbett a round of applause for being here, for showing up, for sharing his story. We appreciate you, John. We appreciate you sharing that story. I know because of time, thank you so much for these questions. He's willing to stay after, so in the lobby, he's just going to go out there. So if you do have a question for him, he's willing to stay and have conversation. So one more round of applause for John Turbett. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you so much. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Liza.
Excellent.